Dogman. In Australia. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story for you about seeing a wolf-headed, upright, man-like creature in the hottest place I've ever been, which is the continent of Australia. Actually, I shouldn't refer to it as seeing the creature, as we spent more time running away from it than we did looking at the thing. First of all, my heart goes out to everyone in Australia during this terrible time, but my story happened years back, when that country was still one of the most laid back on the planet. I'm an American from the Midwest who went to Australia on a hiking adventure vacation with my first wife Margaret, back when the Crocodile Dundee movies were popular in 1988. We had somehow managed to get an entire month away from our commitments in the States, and a big part of that, I think, was that we both at the time worked for my wife's father. Margaret brought her camera with her as she idolized Linda McCartney and fancied herself a photographer. Don't get excited, as she got no photos of the Dogman we were forced to deal with. When Margaret took a photo in those days, it involved us both stopping and her taking 10 minutes to unpack all her equipment. Then she'd set the camera up on a tripod and fiddle with settings and light meters and other doohickeys I don't even remember the name of. Then, whenever she declared that she was finished, the entire thing had to be dismantled and packed back in her backpack for the next time. All the film was brought back to the United States, where she developed it in her darkroom, so I didn't get to see anything until we got back. One thing we hadn't thought enough about beforehand is how hot Australia is. I mean, it's worse than California, and apparently mountains light up in flames from the extreme sunlight. None of that happened to us, but we ended up taking advice from a local and changing our plans to visit John Forest National Park because it has a number of cooling waterfalls in it. We were jokingly warned that we might run into a yowie, the Australian Bigfoot, because they like the waterfalls too. But our monster encounter did not take place by the water. It took place at the Swan View Tunnel. This was not an intended destination on our part, as we had been wandering on that day in the early evening hours when the sun was not so intense. We ended up in this outdoor walkway between two impressive natural rock walls, walking toward a tunnel into the mountain or hill itself. We didn't really want to go inside, as we did not bring flashlights with us and it was starting to get dark, as I said. We decided to turn around and head back to camp, but when we did reverse course, we found ourselves facing a very, very large man off in the distance, walking our way. I instantly stopped upon sight of this individual, but Margaret kept walking. I tried to grab her, but she was already out of my reach. The sheer size of the man off in the distance caused me to pause. There was something else strange about him as well, or I should say there was everything else strange about him. I could not yet put my finger on what it was, since to me at that moment he was just a silhouette. I called out to my wife, who answered me sarcastically, mocking my concerned tone. I asked her to stop, and she repeated my words in a condescending, sarcastic, and insulting manner. At this point, she was about halfway between me and the very large, very strange-looking individual. Beginning to panic, but not entirely sure why, I called out to her again in a more demanding way, insisting she come back to me. That only got her to turn around to face me and begin swearing at me in 2 languages, telling me I was not her property, and other feminist anthems, as she continued to walk backward toward the mysterious and absurdly large man. Now, Australia can be a dangerous place. I mean, they have more venomous snakes than non-venomous ones. Spiders are venomous. Most of the sea life is venomous. Heck, even the cute-looking animals like the platypus pack a painful venom. The only venom I ever received in that great and ancient world came from my ex-wife Margaret. As she tore into me, I was informed of all my shortcomings as she continued to march backward toward the large figure. Now whatever I said was interrupted and shouted over. She'd wait till I started to speak, then blast out insults at me. I was trying to save her life, and she was basically making me wonder why I was bothering. I expect some of you may already be wondering why I didn't just let her go right then. But that's not what you do when you're having your first really serious battle with your wife. We hadn't really argued much at all until we came to Australia, and at that time, I chalked it up to the heat. Yes, she had been seeming very unreasonable, but I had not had time to reflect on my own behavior yet, and I wasn't sure that I wasn't being just as surly as she had been. We were both more uncomfortable out in nature there than we had anticipated being. I still didn't want her getting any closer to that immense man, though, and he seemed larger the closer we got to him. At this point, something happened that caused my wife to actually shut up for a second. No, it wasn't a miracle, although it certainly felt like it in the moment. She had verbal diarrhea, spewing forth words non-stop that smelled as bad as vomit, even from a distance. She had basically become the possessed girl from The Exorcist, but the pea soup she was puking were words designed to hurt the man who cared the most about her. Instead of being angry at her, I was confused as to why she was being such a complete brainless jerk, and I was afraid. No, I was terrified of that strange figure that she was making us both approach. But when she shut her hellish maw, she also stopped walking backward toward her doom, and she stood there with a strange expression on her face. I called out to her again, but that was when she finally turned around to look behind her. She must have heard the man's approach or something, I thought at the time. And then I heard it. Even from my distance, I heard what she was hearing, which was a very low, very deep, animal growling. It echoed slightly in that rocky walkway, and I looked around for a few seconds trying to determine the direction the growling was coming from. Of course, it was coming from that man in the distance. Squinting my eyes in the dusk, I thought I saw eye shine from this man's eyes. I blinked, but it still seemed to be there, a soft glow coming from his eyes. Was that the setting sun reflecting off sunglasses? Why would he be wearing sunglasses in the setting sun anyway? I studied that figure, and as I noticed that he had very oddly shaped legs, Margaret screamed. I mean, she screamed bloody murder. It sounded like I had walked into a horror movie. The next thing I knew, Margaret was running toward me, a look of shock and terror on her face. I held my arms out to catch her and hold her, to reassure her, even though I was just as afraid as she was. She ran past me, not even slowing down, and then she ran into the tunnel at the end of the stone-walled walkway. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't really have any plan concerning that man walking toward me, the extremely tall one with the odd, crooked legs. I did know, however, that I did not want to run into that tunnel. It looked too dark in there to see, and who knows what kinds of venomous insects or animals might be lurking inside that darkness. Once I saw her go in there, I didn't feel as though I had any option left except to follow, though. And please don't tell me I should have left her, as she was my wife, and I still was not even sure what was happening. Inside the tunnel, the light coming in from either side was still bright enough that you could see where you were going. My wife had taken refuge in a doorway-shaped depression built into one side of the tunnel, as though the large man wouldn't be able to see her there. I could see her there, and I ran over to her asking why she didn't come back to me when I was trying to tell her about that large, strange man. She began using unnecessarily foul and insulting language to inform me that there was no man out there. Thought she'd lost her mind, but she talked over my response rudely and insultingly, making fun of me for not even knowing when I had seen a werewolf. A werewolf? At that point, I wondered if any of the venomous animals in Australia had venom that makes your wife hallucinate. "The werewolf, you idiot," she hissed at me, indicating the direction of the large man. I looked, and I saw his silhouette in the tunnel entrance. And this time, I was certain I was seeing eyeshine. I also saw those odd legs, and I saw what looked like horns on top of his head. One of the horns moved, and I understood what Margaret was saying. That was not a man after all, was it? She may have been slow to sense the danger, but she was quicker than I was in realizing that this was not a man at all, but a fur-covered creature that walked up on its hind legs like a man. I made a move to break and run to the other end of the tunnel to try to reach the other side before the animal man could catch us, but Margaret held me back. She wanted us to hide in that false doorway, the doorway I could easily see she was hiding in as I entered the tunnel. The animal man was going to be able to see us there if he didn't already. We were wasting time hiding in that spot, as it was not a very good hiding spot at all and would not conceal us very well. I really wanted to run, but she was my wife, and I had promised to love and honor her. Of course, she had promised to love, honor, and obey, but she never meant a word of any of that. So I stupidly stood there, pressing my back against my backpack, which was pressed against the wall. Both of us were sticking out far enough that we were not hidden at all. And I was doing this to please a woman who was only going to dump me for a richer guy once we got back to the States. It's a miracle I lived to tell you this story. I really deserved to get taken down on that day. A waft of the nastiest smelling air I ever breathed hit us, and I nearly gagged. It was like the smell of a wet dog plus rotten meat, if you can even imagine something so horrible. I figured that must be the smell of that animal man. Margaret began dramatically gagging and choking in the moment, totally playing it up like she couldn't breathe, and her scene resulted in the creature man making a staccato shouting sound at us, halfway between the sounds of a big dog barking and an army sergeant barking orders. Margaret took off running toward the far tunnel exit, hacking and coughing as she ran. Why she had not let me do that earlier when it would have made more sense, I don't know. Emerging from the false doorway, I turned and got one good look at the creature. I'm going to tell you what I saw. This was something like a man, but not a man. It was over 7 feet tall and taller than any human being I'd ever seen. It was entirely covered in gray fur, or black fur, it was hard to tell. Let's say dark gray fur. The legs were indeed bent oddly, as they were shaped like the hind legs of a four-legged beast. This creature stood and walked on those hind legs, however. She was right. The harpy was right. It was a werewolf. As my eyes moved upward from those dog legs, I saw it had a dog tail between those legs. It wore no clothing, but was instead covered in dog fur. The chest was not like a dog's, as it was wide and muscular, far more muscular than I was, either then or now. It had arms like a bodybuilder, not like a canine or lupine animal, and those thick, scary-looking limbs ended in claws so large that they may as well have been hands. The claws ended in long talons that could slice a loaf of bread for you with one swipe. I looked at the face of the man-like wolf for maybe 1 second, possibly 2. It was lit just well enough, and I was just used to the dim light barely enough that I could see him in detail. And yet now, the eye shine I wasn't certain I was seeing earlier was so bright as to dominate and stand out most among all his features. Although the head looked like that of a wolf, the neck was so thick and so short as to almost not be a neck at all. It almost looked like a wolf head dropped onto the broad shoulders of a human athlete. The ears were up on top of its head, as I've already indicated, and the nose and mouth were more of a snout, like a long, dark, wolf-like dog snout. It had a dog nose, a dark, leathery looking dog nose, and it had long fangs that hung down over its lips, too big to be contained inside the mouth. You don't have to guess why I only looked at that face for a second before joining my wife and running away in panic. The smell of that Dogman werewolf thing was so bad that it's hard to even explain it to you. In order to run, you have to breathe heavily, pant like a dog even. You have to take a lot of air in and expel a lot as well. Breathing in the fumes, and that's a good descriptive term for that smell. It was almost like gas fumes. It was that deadly. It made me feel dizzy. I remember the idea flashing through my increasingly muddled mind that it could be that we ran into the animal with the worst hygiene in all of Australia. Or it could be that this dogman or werewolf had the ability to emit gas of some sort that incapacitated its opponent. Perhaps it needed to get its prey into an enclosed space like a cave or like that tunnel so that the noxious, poisonous odor could reduce the prey to a nauseated, confused state, too unwell to defend itself. For this reason, with this idea in my head, I panicked, not knowing if I would make it out, or if I would forget halfway there what I was trying to escape from. What if the odor subdued me and I just laid down on the tunnel floor to die? This frightened realization gave me an extra pump of adrenaline, and I found myself racing past my wife toward the tunnel exit, even as I became befuddled and confused along the way. I remember collapsing face first into dirt and feeling very confused about who I was and what I was doing. Some people were there, one of whom gasped as I fell, and several more who laughed at my pratfall. I remember someone with an Australian accent saying, "Well, what have we got here?" as a woman emerged from the tunnel behind me, screeching about a monster and a werewolf. I looked at her, and she looked like a monster herself to me in that moment. She was covered in sweat and dirt, and she had the most hideous expression on her ugly, ugly face. And then, as I breathed the clean air and my mind came back to me, I realized this was my wife. She had always seemed beautiful to me before, but something about the way she screamed at these total strangers to help her made me realize she was the ugliest person on the planet. The people there drove us to a hospital, but along the way it all came back to me, and unfortunately to Margaret as well. Her ego returned long before we reached the hospital, and she had caused our rescuers to make it clear they were glad to be rid of us when they pointed us toward the emergency room door and sped away before my wife could demand anything more of them. We went back to the States early, and were gonna spend the rest of our vacation at home. Margaret never went back to being the nice girl I married, though. For whatever reason, once she entered into battle axe mode, she seemed to plan to stay that way for life. I remember going back to work 2 weeks early just so that I would have to face her for fewer hours each day. I remember after she dumped me, her father dumped me for my job as well. My former mother-in-law, who had always been kind to me, told me it wasn't my fault. Margaret was never going to be able to keep up pretending to be a nice person for very long, her mother informed me. She said I should consider myself lucky to get away. At least, since she was richer than me, I wouldn't have to pay alimony. And since there were no kids, no child support, I was broken all apart over that woman. But I don't know why. Because she almost got me literally broken apart by the Dogman. In Australia. Our executive producer today is Sandra. She's more fun than a double entendre. We'll keep scheming and we'll keep dreaming as long as we're backed by Sandra Freeman. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Sandra Freeman, for making this episode possible. In return, Sandra receives all our secret uncensored episodes Far Too Wild to tell on this channel, plus our over 21 hours of archived secret stories available nowhere else. In addition, Sandra gets to watch advanced previews of our episodes whenever possible, and so can you. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Sandra Freeman did and click that join button under this or any of our videos. And now here's our TV spokesdog Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.